Good morning. Today we'll start this new chapter, chapter 4, which deals with costing and pricing for transportation. Um, Again, I'd like to remind you if you have any problem um in navigating through any of the presentations with the quizzes or the structure of the course in general, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me either by email or calling me in my cell phone 701 200 4699. Um, if you have some glitches with any of the setting in the blackboard, do also let me know. So let us start this chapter, costing and pricing for transportation. In this chapter, we'll look into transportation pricing principles and the practices which are done by many carriers. Now, in the previous lecture we have talked about deregulation, how the price was regulated and it was mostly for the railroad companies, and then it got deregulated. Now, the term rate, which represent the carrier's charges, was more prevalent before the deregulation. So the rates published in tariff were available to all shippers. Rates were the lawful charge. The published rates for a given commodity movement was available to any shipper meeting condition of the tariff. And if any of the carrier wanted to change the rate, there was some regulation uh, which um, stopped them from doing that arbitrarily. They needed some approval of the competent authority to do that. And before the regulation, the competent authority for this was the ICC. These rates were largely based on carrier cost, and these rates also influenced short-term market conditions. So these rates rarely influenced short-term market condition. So let me explain this. Uh, before the carrier went to ICC for the approval, they had to do their own costing, why they're charging a particular rate, and then uh, the the ICC, the competent authority, went through their estimated cost and then they approved. The rates rarely influenced by short-term market condition. Because these rates were published in the tariff, it didn't fluctuate much. So once it was published, it was effective for a certain period of time. Though the market might have fluctuated within that time, but the rates remains constant. So I think we understand this was not a very conducive situation for the carriers, because conditions, the price of commodities, the price of the the gas might have changed, but they had been charging the same rate irrespective of its basic cost structure. Next slide. In post deregulation period, transport prices largely determined and driven by market forces. In economics, we always say that the price is determined by the interaction of demand and supply. Demand and supply are the market forces. Carrier cost still a major force, but as part of the dynamic between customer demand and carrier supply conditions. It's true that even now the carrier does a basic estimation of its cost, but the price which he charges to the shipper is not only based on the cost, but a dynamic interaction between the demand and the supply existing in the market at that particular condition or at that particular time. Motor and rail carriers still offer tariff rates. These rates are no longer subject to regulatory control. So they can fix, these carriers can identify, or they can set their own rate irrespective of um, the interference, or free from interference from the regulatory bodies. Many of these rates which are published may not be the actual rate which the shippers or the carriers charge to the shippers. Carriers can go into negotiation with a particular shipper and he can fix the price based on that negotiation. Prices charged much more reflective of prevailing market condition and each party's market needs. So unlike the period before deregulation, after the deregulation, prices were determined mostly by market conditions. Next slide. Chapter organization. In this chapter, we are going to look into perfect competition and monopoly, oligopoly and monopolistic competition, theory of contestable market, pricing principles, cost of service pricing, value of service pricing, rates, systems and pricing in practice, pricing in transportation management. So these are the basic areas into which we'll have some discussion in this chapter. Market structure models. Models evolve from conventional economic theory. Attempts to explain pricing behavior of collection of firms facing with a particular market condition. Number of competitors, degree of product differentiation, barrier to entry, etc. Now, these are the factors like number of competitors, degree of product differentiation, barrier to entry. These basically determine what type of competition exists in the market. Again, the competitions are, or the type of market conditions are, perfect competition, monopolistic competition, or perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and market differentiation. So let us see what each of these are. In perfect competition, there are many sellers and many buyers. Again, many sellers for the same product where the commodities sold are the same. So we understand that in this condition, if one particular seller sets his price higher than the rest, the buyers will move from one seller to the other. So it's the market force which determines the price. Each seller faces a perfectly elastic demand curve. What is that? Perfectly elastic demand curve is when the price is high, the demand is low. When the price is low, the demand is high. That's a perfectly elastic demand curve. So the other attributes of perfect competition is the buyers and the sellers can enter and exit the market at their own will. So there is no entry barrier and exit barrier. So everything is market driven. It's based on whether the buyers and the sellers are happy with the market or not. and market determines the price. In a monopolistic condition, there is one seller and that particular product has no close substitute or competition. So in this condition, there is too little output and excessively high profit. So because there is one seller, there is little output and high profit. Oligopoly, that's another market condition where there are few large sellers and the products are substitutable among those few sellers. So if you don't buy, say there are 4 sellers, if you don't buy from seller 1, then you can buy it from seller 2. So they try to control the market, but not to that extent as that often monopoly. In a monopolistic competition, there are many small sellers, but there is some product differentiation. The products are not exactly same, so you can move from one to the other, one seller to the other, but probably you have to compromise on the attribute of the product because they sell different products, not exactly the same product. So we have looked into 3 market condition: perfect competition, monopoly, and we looked into 4 market conditions: perfect competition, monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Next slide. Market structure models. Few markets either perfectly competitive or totally monopolistic. So these are 2 extremes: perfect competition and monopolistic. Most market conditions are somewhere in between. Now all transport modes encounter some degree of oligopolistic competition. Why? Competitors' products are substitutable. There is high cross elasticity. In pricing and output decisions, sellers must consider potential reaction of competitors, so mutually interdependence. So we call the transportation market oligopolistic competition because there are a few numbers of sellers in the market. Now the products which they offer, they are not exactly same, but they can be replaced by one another. And there is some cross elasticity. That means if price for one commodity is really increased to some extent that the buyers would be forced to move from that particular service. By service we mean the transportation service here, to another. So if you say the example of railroad and truck, the service which they offer is not exactly same. There's some difference between them. But if the price of one of the mode increases to that extent that the sellers would be forced, or the shippers would be forced to move from that particular mode to the other one where the price is still low. So there is some cross elasticity and they are mutually interdependent. There is some dependence between them. If the price of you cannot fix your price arbitrarily because you have some competition from other mode of transportation. Next slide. Theory of contestable markets. Instead of many sellers, threat to entry from new competitors put down pressure on price. And the necessary conditions are no barrier to entry, no economies of scale, consumers able and willing to switch, carriers are not able to respond to new entrants' price. In some time period, theory applies well to airline industries, other times it does not. So let me explain this. Uh, in this theory of contestable market, uh, we see the phenomena that there may not be existing in the existing condition, there may not be enough of competition, or there might be only few sellers. But if the seller's price is too high and the profit margin increases, the chances are there'll be other sellers who will be ready to enter the market. If you take the example of the airlines industry, there are few existing sellers, the airline companies who are there in the market. But if this airlines industry becomes too profitable, if the margin is really high, then it would be comparatively easy for other companies or new entrants to enter the airlines industry to increase the competition because the barrier is low. You can just buy one or two planes and you can enter the industry. And once there is new entrants in the market, it becomes difficult for the existing companies who are there because the buyers would be probably moving to the new companies because their price is low. So this is the condition for, this is called the contestable market, theory of contestable market, where if you arbitrarily try to set your price too high, you will be contested by new sellers who can enter the market at their own discretion. Now, relevant market area. We have talked about different market conditions: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, or monopolistic competition, and oligopolistic competition. But we cannot say that the whole transportation industry is oligopolistic or whole market condition is perfect competition. The transportation market can be actually divided into number of sectors, and each will have its own market characteristics. Now, the division can be by mode, it can be by route, it can be by commodity, it can be by shipment size. Say from uh, Dallas to Minneapolis, that can be a specific market, and there might be a type of market condition for that route. From Dallas to Houston, it can be a different market condition again. So this is based on route. Now again, for commodities, say for coal or iron ore, there can be a particular market condition. For computers and laptops and televisions, there can be another market condition. So for individual mode, for individual route, for individual shipment size, the market can vary. The cost of service pricing. So there are different ways by which the pricing can be determined. The price of the transportation service can be determined. One of that is the cost of service pricing. An approach to setting prices on the basis of cost of providing the service. So basic assumption is I will charge you based on how much it cost me to provide that service. So if my cost of production is high, I'll charge you more. If my cost of production is low, I'll charge you low. So the principal assumptions is transportation service output is homogeneous. One group of customer with similar service preference and sensitivity to price. So that's one group. Customers must cover all cost. So whatever cost the producer or the seller or the carrier is incurring, that should be covered by the cost he's getting by selling that particular product. And the last point is the seller has some sort of a control over the pricing structure, which will allow him to maximize his profit. If that is not true, then probably the seller has to fix his price lower than his cost, which will force him to incur some loss. Again, for cost of service pricing, there are two options, the two ways the costing can be done. One is average cost approach. So in that average cost approach, the total cost is divided by the total output. Now when we say to average cost, we should understand that for transportation costing there are two variables. One is fixed cost, or there are two components. One is the fixed cost, the other is the variable cost. Fixed cost is what you incur irrespective of how much service you are providing. So say you are in a trucking company, you have paid for the truck and you are paying for the interest irrespective of how much you drive. You are paying your insurance and the damage cost. So these factors doesn't really depend on how much service you provide. But on the other hand, you have the variable cost, which might include the driver fee or the salary paid to the driver, the fuel charges, the cost for repair, the wear and tear, which might be dependent on the amount of miles you drive. So those are the variable cost. In average cost approach, what we do is we add the total fixed cost and variable cost and divide that by the total demand. And for trucking companies, it might be the total miles driven. So in the numerator, we have the fixed cost and the total variable cost, and the denominator, number of miles driven. But the problem with this approach is, initially when you set the price, you really don't know at the end of the period for which you are setting your price how many miles you are going to drive. Now it's again a loop. It's a problem that it's always persistent. Is if you assume that you are driving low miles, then your cost would be high. Okay, if your cost is high, your the demand for your service would be even lower. On the other hand, if you assume from the beginning that you will be driving a lot of miles, and in the denominator you will have that many miles, more miles, you are dividing by more miles, so your cost will come down. If your cost comes down, so probably you will be driving few more miles, extra miles, because the demand would be more if you charge less than what you had been charging before. So understanding how much you'll be driving at the end of the year is really a trial and error game. The costs are relatively high. Approach criticized fixed or common cost arbitrarily allocated to output with little relation to cost of producing units, results in loss of some profitable traffic due to high prices. Now in this approach, in this average cost approach, because we are including the fixed cost, the price, this is generally higher than the marginal cost. I'll talk about marginal cost in the next slide. And the consequence of this high cost would be loss of some demand. Okay, next slide. In this figure we see there are two straight lines which are coming down, the average revenue and the marginal revenue. The marginal revenue is below average revenue. That's because in marginal revenue we have the variable cost. In average revenue we have both the variable cost and the fixed cost, which are divided by the total amount of service provided. So that's why we have that AR over MR. We have quantity plotted in the x-axis and price on the y-axis. So as the quantity increases, both AR and MR decreases. Then we have the marginal cost and average cost, which is denoted by MC and AC. The marginal cost cuts average cost at certain point. That's because after certain point the marginal cost becomes more than the average total cost of production. For every unit, the term marginal means the cost for 1 unit extra production. So below that point where they intersect, the marginal cost and the average cost, below that quantity the marginal cost is less than average cost. That means for every extra unit of production it costs less than what is the average cost. But after a certain value, that marginal cost becomes more, so it increases. When it increases, then the manufacturer or the carrier has to really think, like, he's spending more for that extra unit of production, so what he should do. Now at one point we see that the marginal cost and the average cost cuts each other. If you see the quantity QM, if you go straight up, you see that curved line MC cuts the MR. So that's the point where marginal cost is more or equal to marginal revenue. After that point, if you go beyond QM, for extra every unit of production, the cost is more than revenue. So that can be one price fixation or one quantity fixation, where the producer will stop manufacturing or the carrier will stop its service. That's QM, where the marginal cost becomes, or beyond which the marginal cost becomes more than marginal revenue. And in that case, if you take that straight line straight vertically up, where it cuts average revenue, and where it cuts average cost, now that shaded area, so PZ, if you see on the y-axis we have the PZ, that's the difference in marginal revenue, average revenue and average cost. Average revenue and average cost. So that's the profit margin, and that profit margin for individual product, and that multiplied by quantity QM will give the total profit. Now there can be another manufacturer who can keep on producing till that marginal cost cuts average revenue, and at that point both are equal, the marginal cost and the average revenue are equal. If you go beyond, the marginal cost is even more than average revenue. So you understand you are basically losing after that. And if you take a line straight down, that's QZ, and that QZ is the point of production where marginal cost is equal to average revenue. If you go beyond, now if you see a point where the average cost cuts average revenue, okay, so average cost is equal to average revenue, so at that point there is no profit, no loss, so production must stop there. That's Q. So if you go beyond, there is sure to make some loss. The producer or the carrier is sure to make some loss. This is again a very common economic figure, and if you want really further explanation, you can consult any economics book. Marginal cost approach. Price is set at marginal or variable cost of producing each unit of output. Same practical problem. So price set at marginal or variable cost of producing each unit of output. In this pricing strategy, we try to fix our price based on the variable cost. So again, that variable cost is also called the marginal cost. That marginal means the cost for one extra unit of output. That's marginal cost. And marginal revenue is the extra price, extra revenue which is obtained by the carriers or the sellers for one additional output of goods sold. So in this approach, marginal cost approach, as long as the marginal revenue is more than the marginal cost, the seller is going to sell his product. But you should understand that the marginal cost is less than the average cost. So basically, the seller is selling his product at a cost which is less than the average cost. Some practical problems of this is the marginal cost can be difficult to calculate for small quantity of output. You really don't know what is the cost of that extra output, and it's difficult to measure. Marginal costs can fluctuate widely as the volume changes. Based on the laws of return, like you are having a high rate of return or low rate of return, the marginal cost will vary. Next, problem of decreasing cost industry. If the price set at marginal cost, then firms in each industry will not make a profit. So if it is a decreasing cost industry means if you keep on producing, if you keep on increasing your output, your marginal cost decreases. So it keeps on decreasing. The more you produce, the cost for that additional piece of production is less than the previous. So the cost curve basically drops. And so if you price your goods based on that, then basically you are always lowering your price, and in that case the chances of making profit decreases. So this graph actually shows that decreasing cost situation. If you take that first point, again you have to concentrate. We see that the marginal revenue and the average revenue are the straight lines which have got a negative slope. Those two straight lines which are dropping down, one of them is the average revenue and the other is the marginal revenue, and the marginal revenue is lower than the average revenue. That means for every extra unit you sell, your revenue is less than your average revenue. Now you have the marginal cost. The marginal cost intersects the marginal revenue at that point where the dotted line intersects the bold marginal cost line. At that point, the quantity of production is QM. Okay. If you stop your production at that point, then basically your cost of production is PC and your revenue is PM. So the difference between PM and PC is your profit. Okay. On the other hand, if you move to I know it's difficult for you to read that table. Let me also open the book along with that. It's figure 4.2. So in the figure 4.2, what it says is, if you take your production up to QR, QR is the intersection of average cost and average revenue. So average cost and average revenue, if you stop at that point, average cost and average revenue, so at that point your revenue is PR and your cost is PC. So now you have that, you have your profit as PR minus PC. And the next quantity, if your marginal cost crosses the average revenue, the marginal cost at the last point where we see the marginal cost crosses the average revenue, so if you produce anything beyond that, then the cost of production would be even more than the average revenue. Okay, so you will be basically incurring some loss if you go beyond QC. The other approach of setting the price of a commodity is called the value of service pricing. So in that value of service pricing, it is believed that the price should be based on value of the product. It is based on third degree price discrimination, and it is also based on differential pricing. The pricing according to the product value, the basic understanding of this practice of pricing is, for high priced product, the cost of transportation would be higher than for low priced product. For a low priced product, say if you take the coal or iron ore, the cost of transportation will probably be 50% of the cost of the product. So if you charge anything higher, then that commodity will probably move to some other mode because they're price sensitive. But on the other hand, for high valued products like computers or televisions, the transportation cost is probably 1% of the cost of the product. So if you change it, even if you double it, you will not really make that big of a difference in the final price of the product. So in this justification is given, and it stated that for high priced item, the service rendered should be, the cost of service rendered or the price of service rendered will be more, and for low priced item the price of service rendered will be less. High valued items are less price elastic. For low priced item, they are more price elastic. Next slide. So in this figure we see that for high valued items, when even if the price changes from P1 to P2, the change in quantity is not that high amount, or it's not that noticeable. It's from Q1 to Q2. But on the other hand, for low priced, low valued items, which is more elastic, the demand of that service is more elastic to price. If the same amount of price changes from P1 to P2, the quantity demanded changes from Q1 to Q2. And you should understand the logic behind this. The low priced item, uh, they're sold at a much lower price. So if you increase the price of transportation, that will hike up the percentage change in the price would be quite high. So you cannot probably do that. But for high priced item, even if you change, even if you double the cost of transportation, it won't really affect much on the final price. So it's less price elastic. Now, third degree price discrimination, it states that sellers set separate prices for separate groups of buyers of essentially same service. So you you make some discrimination in price. So you must be able to segregate buyers into submarkets defined by differences in price elasticity. So for commodities which are more price elastic, the price you will charging them would be lower, and for commodities which are less price elastic, price you will be charging them are higher. Seller must be able to prevent transfer of sales between submarkets. So a person who is paying the rent or paying the cost for shipping his low priced items, say coal or iron ore, he should not use the same price for moving his computers or televisions. So the carrier has to be careful that this whatever commodity the seller is uh, planning to or using his service to transport, he should not use the same transportation means to ship other goods. Seller must possess some degree of monopoly power, and that will actually enable him to segregate and use price differentiation. It can be, this price differentiation can also be for two different routes or two different destinations. As I said, moving goods from Dallas to Chicago or from Dallas to Florida. Dallas to Florida, it might be more expensive. The carrier might ask for a higher price because he has to probably come empty out of Florida. So for that reason, he can probably ask higher price, and that's a price, third degree price discrimination. Now, differential pricing means it's very similar to third degree price discrimination. So same three conditions apply, means of segmenting buyers. So the 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 market can be divided based on commodities, time, place, and individual person. Uh, so based on commodities hauled, based on the time, what time is it? It's it's a peak Christmas time. Probably the price charged by the carriers would be higher. By the place, as I said, between Chicago and between Florida, between Chicago, the price might be lower than in Florida, and by individual person. But for individual person, if that person feels that you are discriminating based on that individual, he might take the recourse of law. So the carrier should be careful about that. He should not. Uh, he should have some solid reason based on which he is doing his price discrimination. So you have two distances A AB and AC, and the same product is being hauled from AB to AC, but there can be a price discrimination based on the route. So the price for AC can be higher than from A to B. And there has to be some logic, like as I said, the backhaul, the trucks has to come empty from B to A. Probably that's for that reason the carrier has to charge a higher price. Value of service pricing. So we have looked into the different pricing strategies. To sum up, I would say that we have variable cost or marginal cost, which sets the lower level of pricing, the value of service, which sets the upper level of pricing. So the price can be somewhere in between. So this is useful if high percentage of cost are fixed cost or common cost. Enables carrying of traffic that might be lost if average cost based prices are charged. So many times if we have the whole cost, fixed cost included in the cost structure, then there is a chance that much of the traffic would be lost. In many cases, when the price less than the average price, still that service might be profitable as long as it is more than the variable cost. So even if it doesn't cover the total cost, that is the variable cost and the marginal cost, but still the service can be profitable provided the marginal cost is covered. So in order to set the price, it's important to know how the cost behaves and knowing an idea of the price elasticity. The cost, by knowing how the cost behaves, is one will know what is the underlying basis for setting up the price. By knowing elasticity, one can estimate how much a seller can charge the buyer so that he doesn't move away to some other seller. Or in our transportation case, how much a carrier can charge a shipper for the service so that he doesn't move away to some other mode. Next slide. This is another explanation of how the price is set. So the heading as it reads, cost of service as price, floor and value of service as price, price ceiling, head haul, back haul example. So if you see over here, we have that line which divides the figure, that horizontal line. Above the horizontal line we see the head haul, and below that is the back haul. Head haul is the front part of the journey, back haul is the return journey. Now $90, which is the marginal cost or the variable cost of the transportation for that head haul, the average cost with fully allocated total cost or fully allocated fixed cost is $100. If the price is set at 110, there is a profit of $10. Now if we take also the backhaul into consideration, that means you are charging while going in the front haul and also in the back haul, then the average cost would be $50. That's half of 100 because you are charging on both ways. So if any price, suppose $80 is charged on that, which is much less than the marginal cost, in that case again there is some profit. That's 80 minus 50, that's $30. So that's the profit if the head haul and the back haul are charged. But in most cases we see that the back haul, in the back haul the charges are much less. As long as it covers the variable cost, it's a profit. Even if it doesn't cover a profitable cost, still it's a win-win, because otherwise that part of the journey would have been without um, any price whatsoever. So while coming back, say goods are delivered from Dallas to Florida, that's the head haul. So that price is much higher. In the back haul, whatever is the price that is obtained from the shipper, which might be even less than the variable cost, but still it's a profit of using that head haul service or providing that head haul back haul service, because the truck is not coming empty. Otherwise, that service would have been wasted. Rate making in practice. Um, Now we talk about rates, like how, the published rates, how they are estimated, how they are structured. So rates and tariff. In tariff is the published rate. That's what is the tariff. Individual tariff, if a particular shipper or a particular if a particular carrier um, publishes a tariff for a particular commodity, for a particular route or a particular shipper, that's called the individual tariff. Red Bureau on and the Bureau tariffs, these are the more general tariffs which are published and which can be used by a bigger user of transportation facility, like large number of shippers and carriers can use that rate tariff. General rates, it depends on the class, exception and commodity rate, each designed to simplify the potential complexity of trillions of possible rates. Now the thing is, like, we are publishing a particular rate, and that's for a particular shipment between an origin and destination pair. But unfortunately, there can be thousands and thousands of origin and destination pair, and there can be so many different type of commodities. So we try to generalize, like, say Plano, Allen, Richardson, Garland, they will all fall under the class of Dallas. So that's type of a generalization. So if the originate is in Plano, but still it will be considered, the the distance would be considered from Dallas. Then say for plastic commodities, there can be so many different varieties of plastics, but they can be classified under one umbrella. So in that way, if we can classify the distance or the origin and the destination, if we can classify the class of commodities, we can simplify the task of publishing the tariffs, which will have the rates published. Class rate system provides rate for any commodity between any two geographic locations. Simplification procedure. Now, as I said, like, um, location in proximity are grouped and represented by red basis points. Each pair of points assigned a red basis number. So places which are close together are grouped in one point, and between two respective grouped points there'll be a red basis number. Products with similar transportation characteristics are classified under one commodity class, and they are given a classification number and class rating. In the rate structure, we get the national scale of rates, which is CWT, that's 100 pounds basis. Like, what is the cost of transporting 100 pounds of a particular group of commodity. So class rate simplification, simplification objective, simplification result, minimize number of shipping points, table of rate, basis points and numbers. So that the shipping points that basically tries to simplify the the origin and the destination. Simplify rate structure, national scale of rates. Simplify rate structure. So That rate structure tries to um, simplify it on the national basis, minimize number of commodities to be rated. Classification system, commodities are classified uh, under a number of groups. So over here we see that Michigan, we have those points and apply rate from or to. Like climax, that particular point or a city would have the would be classified under uh, say Battle Creek. So even if the shipment starts at climax, it would be taken as a shipment from Battle Creek. That's where the distance would be calculated. So it is applicable for all states, like in Ohio, mm, say Cleves, uh, that will basically take the origin of Cincinnati, origin or destination of Cincinnati. So different places are assigned to bigger places so that the grouping can be done, grouping of location can be done. And then we see the rate basis point, um, say from Flint, Michigan to Cincinnati, Ohio, there is a rate basis point of 300. So based on these, the final price, that the tariff rate is calculated, and these are published by the ICC. We, if you remember, like many of the regulations were done by the ICC, they also published these rates, and these are some simplifications published by them, which helps in estimating the tariff rates. Rate making practice, commodity classification factors, like commodities are classified based on their density, storability, handling, liability. Now you should understand that high dense products mean lower carrying cost per 1,000 pounds. Why is that? So a pound of say iron or a pound of cotton, um, the pound of iron will cost less than a pound of cotton. That's because the iron being, say iron ore, maybe it being more dense, it will take less space for storage. On the other hand, a cotton 1 pound of cotton will have much more space in transportation. So if you have a truck, you can fill much many pounds of iron ore than you can do with cotton. So for this reason, the the more dense commodities will have lower cost per pound or 100 pound or per ton compared to less dense commodities. Storability, commodities which are more storable will have less rate because it is easier to store them. It is easier to move from maybe the warehouse to the trucks or railroads and then take it down. So handling cost would be lower. Similarly, for commodities which are huge, which are bulky, which are irregular shape, their handling cost would be higher than commodities which can be handled easily. Liability. Commodities for which the liability is high, their their rate would be higher because if there is a claim, the carrier has to pay more for those commodities. So consider product value, susceptibility to damage. So these are some of the criteria based on which commodities are classified. Now, this is a more general rule, general guideline. Individual carriers may establish their own commodity exceptions. Okay, and that's because to capture the market. Say a carrier from Dallas to say Chicago might say that for liquid gasoline, the rate that will give to the shippers would be lower than any other commodity. That might be to capture the market. Now, as I said, that after the deregulation, carriers are free to set their price and they can do price differentiation. So if you look at this table 4.3, you'll look at the national motor freight classification. So you have the items, you have the description of the item, and for the different classes you have the rates. You have the LTL, less than truckload, you have the truckload and the maximum weight, and for each of those classes you have the respective points which are given over there in the right hand side. Now let me move over to the next slide. So rate making in practice, what are the different steps which are taken for rate making? Determine the rate basis points for origin destination. So in the first step, we'll try to understand what is the closest origin and what is the closest destination. Then based on that, we determine the rate basis number. This is again a standard table which is developed by ICC, and we try to get the rate basis number. Determine the commodity classification rating, which is again done to group commodities and try to find where a particular commodity falls. Determine rate from cross class rate tariff. So after all these previous three steps are done, we get the rate for that particular class. After we get the rate for the class, we multiply that with the total weight of shipment, and then we get the final rate. So these are the basic steps. If I move over to the next slide, you will see that this is the basic layout of what we have just said. In the first box, determine the rate basis points. In grouping tariff, box 2, determine the rate basis number. In the rate basis number tariff, then we find the rate basis number. So these are the two steps we take initially for getting the rate basis number. In step 3, we try to understand where the particular commodity falls, so we get the class rating. Based on these two, the rate basis number and the class rating, we get the class tariff. Based on the class tariff, we get the class rate. So this is the basic layout of how the rates are estimated. Simple class rate tariff, the rate basis number, minimum charge, the weight group, the classes. So if I move over to table 4.5, which is from your book, so you have the rate basis number, which you get from that ICC's table, the minimum charge, then you get the weight group, then the class. So this class again is basically which class of commodity it falls. It depends on, if you go back to the table 4.3, you will get the class from there. Okay, so based on that class, you will basically estimate the rate, which is in cents per 100 pounds. Okay, or cents in CWT, cents per CWT. In your book, in page number 119, in the 7th edition, there is a worked out example. I think you should go through that, like how the rates are estimated. Next slide. Rate making in practice, exception rates. Individual carrier modification modifies national classification. So individual carrier modifies national classification. So whatever rates you have calculated, that can again be modified by individual carriers used for particular transportation condition. Example, large volume movements, intense competition. If there is a particular huge shipment from one particular origin to one particular destination, uh, a carrier can give much reduced rate to a particular shipper. So this is based on a negotiation, and that's a exception rate. Commodity rate, variety of basis for most common specific rate of a commodity between specified points by a specific route and direction. Typically offered for regular large volume moves. So for, say, you have to haul a particular piece of machinery which is uh, huge volume, it has a structure which cannot be hauled by normal available trucks, the semis or any other available carriers equipment. So that might be a specific rate which can be way beyond what is estimated by the rate classification system. So whatever commodity rates are estimated by a negotiation between a particular buyer and a particular seller, or between a carrier and a shipper, those basically precedes over class and exception rates. Okay, next slide. In this example of commodity rates, uh, item, commodity, from, to, rate, minimum weight. So for a particular item, for a particular commodity, and from and to, then you have the rates and minimum weight. So based on that, you again determine what is the rates per 100 pound, and also you have the minimum weight. So that particular minimum weight has to be there to get that rate. If you see that when the minimum weight is more, the rates are less. So that means the carriers are ready to haul the goods at a lesser rate, provided the shipper is ready to ship a higher mass or higher weight. So in that way, probably they can distribute their fixed cost to a larger volume. Rate making practice, general rate structure were principal basis of rates published by Rate Bureau pre 1980. So pre 1980 rates were published. Post deregulation era, diminished role of Rate Bureau in rate matters. So those rates which are published by the Rate Bureau doesn't really matter much now. We are now in the post deregulation. Increased number of individual carrier tariffs, increased number of individual carrier tariffs. So each individual carrier can publish their own tariff, and a lot of carriers do that. Expanded use of shipper carrier negotiation. Many shippers and carriers get into negotiation. Portion of the general rate system still used in LTL. So some of those rates which were published by the Rate Bureau are still used by LTL. That's because the LTL is less than truckload. In LTL, it is a small portion of the truck which is filled by the shipper, by the goods which are carried from a particular shipper. In that case, the carrier probably would not get into some sort of an rate agreement with that shipper. Commodity classification useful. Simplification. Class rate serves as a benchmark for new type of rates. So commodity classification uses simplification. These are all done, whatever we have discussed in the commodity classification are used to simplify. The rate classes serve as a benchmark for new type of rates. So class rates serve as a benchmark. From the benchmark, it can deviate. It can go either on the higher side, on the lower side. Again, it depends on how much the carrier is ready to provide, what rate the carrier is ready to provide to a particular shipper. Rate system under deregulation. Some new rate types, example, zip code based rates published as part of carrier specific class and commodity rate structure. Many carriers offer web-based zip code tariff as variation of class rate system. Many carrier offer web-based zip code tariff as a variation of rate class system. So many carrier can have their website where you can type in your zip code and the rate would be estimated. Mileage based rates, variation of commodity tariff system, rates quoted per mile regardless of weight. We said before that the rate can vary based on weight, but again for some carrier they might be indifferent to the amount of uh, weight they are carrying from a particular shipper. The rate is specifically based on a number of miles traveled. So how much you want a particular shipper to carry, or a particular carrier to carry, he might give his rate as say $1 per ton per mile. So that is irrespective of how much weight the particular shipper is sending using that particular carrier. Special rates are done to attract more shipment for a particular mode. They have some special cost feature which are part of this special rate. Uh, Students should be aware that this special rate might be based on the tariff, but there are some changes which are introduced after the tariff is published. Some of the special rates are LTL and TL rate. LTL rate is the less than truckload rate. TL is a truckload rate. In most cases, the TL is much lower than LTL. There are different reasons for that. In one, that TL is from one particular origin to destination and goods from a particular shipper fill up the whole truck. In LTL, the shipper doesn't fill up the whole truck, just a part of the truck. So there are a number of infrastructure required to run a LTL operation, like terminals are needed, the loading and unloading are needed. So the terminal costs are usually much higher in LTL. Multiple car rate. These are applicable in railroads. Special rates are given to shippers who can fill up, say, up to 10 railroad cars. So that helps basically for faster delivery, because those 10 cars from a particular shippers would be delivered at a particular destination. So that rate discount is given for multiple cars. Incentive rate is given when to fully utilize the carrier's equipment or operation. Say a particular truck which has a capacity of 80 tons, say a shipper is filling up 20 tons, or a shipper is filling up 60 tons instead of the 80 tons. So the next 20 tons can be filled at a discounted rate, and certain incentive is given for that. Unit train rates. Unit trains are basically a full train. It can be a 100-car train. That's the whole train, goods or freight train. Unit train rates are usually much lower than multiple car or single car rate. Again, that unit train rate can be on TOFC or COFC. That's trailer on flat car and container on flat car. Per car and truckload rate. Per car or per truckload rate are single charge rates for specific origin and destination, and it doesn't depend on the commodity or weight. So it's you're using one car or one truckload and you are paying that rate, right? It isn't dependent on what are the commodities or what is the load that you are filling on that truckload. Any quantity discount. So for any quantity discount, the rate is flat and it's not dependent on the amount of goods that you are shipping. So any quantity rate provides no discount or rate break for large movement. So it's basically say certain dollars per ton. So irrespective of how much you ship, you are paying that rate, that flat rate. Density rate. If the rates are published based on density of the commodity, then it's called the density rate. So you understand, like it's a bit bit uh, difficult probably to remember each of those. So you have to remember, you have to read it number of times to differentiate between uh, each of these special rates. Next slide will also cover some other rates and see how they are different from these. Now, in this particular slide, all these rates are based on characteristics of shipment. Okay. Next, we'll also cover which is based on area, location, or route. Let us look into that in the next slide. So these special rates are dependent on area, location, or route. So it is local rates, joint rates, proportional rates, differential rates, per mile rates, terminal to terminal rates, and blanket or group rate. Local rate is applied when there is movement between 2 points, um, and this rate includes pickup, documentation, billing, and delivery. So all these services are included in that local rate. So look, if I read from the book, it says that local rates apply to any rates between 2 points served by the same carrier. So and it includes the full cost for pickup, for delivery. So between you are at a particular location, particular house, now you are relocating to somewhere, so the whole process of picking up from your existing residence, delivering it to your final destination, the whole documentation process, that would be the local rates. Joint rates. The joint rates are single rates published from a point on one carrier's route to another carrier's destination. So what does it mean? So say you want to move a particular commodity from Dallas to Seattle. Now you get a shipper who move these from Dallas to, say, Montana, and there is another shipper who takes it from Montana to Seattle. So these these rates are called the joint rates. They are basically the destination of one carrier is the origin of another carrier. So one carrier moves you from here to Montana, the second carrier moves you from Montana to Seattle. So this type of rates are usually lower than if it had been the combination of local rates because of the through movement economy. Okay, so there can be some special agreement between these two carriers who can probably transfer goods from one truck to the other at that junction point, and they can provide you with a better rate. Proportional rate. Proportional rate is say goods are moved from Dallas to Oklahoma. That's one part of a route. So you have a shipment which has to move from Dallas to Oklahoma. But that's part of a direct route between Houston and Minnesota. So there is one trucking company which serves between Houston and Minnesota. Um, there is one route which is between Dallas and Oklahoma. So you understand this Dallas and Oklahoma is a part of a longer route. So if this particular route has to survive, probably they have to mm, give shippers a discounted rate. Otherwise, in the back haul or even in the front haul, uh, the route which is from Houston to Minneapolis, that they can basically lift goods from on their way past Dallas and deliver it in Houston, deliver it in Oklahoma, and then move forward to Minnesota. So that's the proportional rate. In most cases, if it was just a movement from Dallas to Oklahoma, the rate would have been higher, but that proportional rate would be lower to be competitive. Now, differential rate is because of certain modes disadvantage, the rate has to be lower than the what it should have been. Uh, like the waterways, they have a differential rate. That's because they're slow. They cannot really uh, doesn't have that much of accessibility. So they have to, in order to compete with railroad, they might have to give a differential low rate. Per mile rates, these rates are published based on per mile basis. So whatever is the commodity, whatever is the quantity, it is on per mile basis. Terminal to terminal rates are basically from one terminal to another, but it doesn't include the local movement. So the shipper has to pick up their goods from the terminals, and deliver at the terminals and pick it up from the final destination terminal. The blanket or the group rates, these are based on locations, like a rate for DFW Metroplex to Boston. So at what location of the DFW Metroplex, that's irrelevant. So there is only one rate which covers for whole DFW Metroplex or whole of Boston. So any movement from within these two cities will have a blanket rate structure. Another type of special rate, which is time and service dependent, one of them is the contract rates. The contract rate is very common in rail, trucking, water, and also in air transportation. So these type of rates are negotiation between the shipper and the carrier, and they are not governed by any sort of published tariff. The objective of this negotiation is to provide some sort of a cost benefit to either party, set rate, inducement, and penalty based on performance of these factors. Like if there is a delay in delivery, or if there is any spoilage of any particular goods in transit, um, then some sort of a penalty can be mm, imposed on the carrier. So that can be again a clause of that contract. Contract can be for delivery of a particular type of car to ship a product which is not very common, which is not general, which again can be a part of a contract negotiation, and the rate can vary. It can either be high or it can be low. Um, Say if there is a piece of equipment which is to be moved, um, and there's a contract between a carrier and a shipper to move that particular piece of equipment, which is special, which requires some special service. So that's again a contract rate which can be much higher than um, a general freight movement in that particular route. There are other forms of special rates. Some of those can be volume based, equipment based, and transit time based. Volume based is if there is a commitment by the shipper that he will be uh, shipping a particular more than a particular amount or volume using a particular carrier, then he might get a discounted rate. Equipment based is when a particular type of, as I said before, a particular type of car is required to move a piece of equipment, that is equipment based. Transit time based is variation in rates by transit time, when it can either go, it can, the carrier might take a longer time to deliver, that might have a reduced rate, or if you want some faster delivery, that might have another rate. So transit time based. Variety of service based, which is again menu driven. In these, other forms of service like loading, unloading, paper clearing, or documentation, those can also be included within the transportation rate, and those are the special rates which can be, again, the shipper and the carrier can get into some agreement and decide on those type of rate. And again, they can be published like, in a different category, and the shipper can choose what are the services he basically requires from the carrier. Deferred delivery, say sometimes the airline companies give the option of deferred delivery. Instead of next day, it can be within 3 days delivery at a much discounted rate. In that deferred delivery, the airline companies basically try to utilize the available space. Wherever there is a space in whichever airlines he tries to, or whichever plane they have between in that particular route, wherever there is a availability, he tries to use it, and in that way he reduces the cost. Next. The other forms of special rates: corporate volume rate, which is a lower rate given to a corporation because of the large volume of shipment. Loading allowance: if the shipper take the responsibility of loading, he might be given a lower rate. Aggregate tender rates are given when the shipper agrees to ship in different commodities using a particular carrier. The FAC rate is given to commodities of all kind, like freight all kind rate. So irrespective of whatever you ship, you are paying a particular rate. Released rates are lower than regular full value rates. They are given sometimes to it is basically a cutoff of how much of your goods are insured, or till what price that product can the carriers can pay back the shipper for the damage or whatever happens during the transit. So you are shipping a goods which is 5,000 pounds or $5,000. So shippers agree to pay you up to $3,000 for any damage which might happen on that for that particular goods. So because of that reduced penalty or reduced insurance, so it's sort of insurance. The carrier might agree to give you a reduced rate because he's basically securing your product at a much lower rate. Empty haul rate, two-way, three-way rate. Empty haul rate is when the truck is returning empty, he might give a much lower rate to the shippers. Two-way, three-way rate, if the if the shipper agrees to avail the trucking service for two-way, for three-way, like delivery at a particular point and from there go to some other destination and so on. So there can be different rates which can be negotiated between the shipper and the carrier based on that. Spot market rates are when there is a service available but there are not much of buyer for that. So there are some empty containers which are laying idle at a particular spot, and the rail can go for a spot market rate. The shippers can get that, can avail that spot market rate and ship their goods at a much lower rate. For the railroad companies, the advantage is they say empty containers are delivered in Seattle from North Dakota, because a lot of wheat are being delivered to Seattle from North Dakota. But there isn't much of commodity which moves back from Seattle to North Dakota to fill up those containers. Now, the railroad companies, the BNSF, can go for a spot market rate. They might offer a very low rate for shippers who might be ready to deliver or avail that service of those empty containers and move their goods from Seattle to North Dakota. Because of that low rate, the shippers might see that it is profitable to move things at all to North Dakota. So those are called the spot market rates. Menu pricing is the carriers are some sort of a additional service which can be provided along with the transportation. So that's the menu pricing service. So these are the different special rates which can be uh, offered by the carriers to the shippers, and these are not fixed. They can vary between the agreement between a shipper and a carrier. They might vary by commodity, they can vary by route, they can vary by time. Next slide. In this slide, we look into the factors which will affect the pricing decision. Some of them are the power of the customers and carriers. By customers, we mean the shippers. So whoever has more negotiating power will try to move the price for his favor. Price elasticity: if the price is more elastic, then the carrier has to be careful that he doesn't hike up the price so that the demand shifts to some other mode. Uh, Also important is the availability of substitute. If uh, substitutes are available, the carriers have to be careful uh, because the demand will move to substitute services. Government control: the Surface Transport Board, um, though now after the deregulation, carriers and shippers doesn't have to, or the carriers doesn't have to publish their rate. But again, if there is some shipper who feels dissatisfied with the service or has got some problem with the rate, or if there is some carrier who complains against another carrier regarding a case of antitrust, STB can intervene. The judicial department is the ultimate body which is responsible for the antitrust enforcement. So both these bodies, the Surface Transport Board and finally the Justice Department, can get involved in this pricing strategy done by the carriers. Next slide. The other factors which might affect the pricing is other carrier involved in interline movement. So there is a movement of passengers through airways from Dallas to Asia. So part of the flight is in American Airlines from Dallas to Newark in New Jersey, and from Newark to New Delhi in Singapore Airlines. So there are two airlines which are involved, and there is a revenue split. Passenger is buying one ticket, but there is a revenue split between these airlines. Now, if one of the airlines hike up the fare, then the other might have to reduce their own fare to keep the total fare intact. Otherwise, the demand might move to some other service provider or some other airlines. Influence of competitors' price leader influence. This happens very much in the airlines industry. The pricing is done based on what competitors does. Oftentimes there is a price leader in the market who influences the price, or who sets his price, and the others follow him. Setting price on new services. Uh, when there is a new service which is introduced in the market, it's difficult to set the price because the demand for that is not known. What should be the actual price is not known. If it is too high, then there'll be more competitors would be entering the market. If it is too low, probably it would be less than the cost the company is incurring or the carrier is incurring to provide the service. So it has to be a very judicious decision. Modification of price over time. Prices set at one time is not written in stone. It has to be modified over time based on the changing demand and changing market condition. Uh, Initial response to price leader change. Now again, or initiating responding to price leader change. Many of these prices, as I said in the previous slide, that it is set by the price leader and the others follow him. So if there is a change which is done by the price leader, the others might also do that. So when he set the price, the others are setting the price. When he's doing some change, the others also introduces that change. General consideration should reflect corporate objective, may vary during product service life cycle, may vary by market. So the corporate objective, if the corporate objective is to provide premium service to customers, so probably the price would be higher um, than other general services. It can vary by the product life cycle. For this, it is the service life cycle. Uh, from the introduction to growth to maturity and decline, there can be different pricing strategy. May vary by market. The pricing can be maybe high in a very competitive market and maybe low in a market where there is no competition, or somewhere in between where there is a medium competition. Then there is a survival based market pricing. There is a profit maximizing pricing strategy. In survival based pricing, the price is set in such a value so that the volume is increased. So the volume increases, there is total utilization of the capacity of the carrier, and again it should be kept in mind the cost incurred for providing the service should be covered. The other strategy is the profit maximization strategy, where the carrier focuses on maximum return on investment. So in this case, he will set a very high price. Um, so uh, it might be that the competition is low, so that he is able to set that high price. Unit volume pricing, skimming, penetration pricing. In unit volume pricing, what is done is, for every square feet for LTL transportation, the carrier can ask for a separate price. So for the first square feet, he can have some price. For the last square feet, he can have a different price altogether. It can be much lower. So the service has to be provided, and transportation is such a service which cannot be stored. So the last few square miles or square feet or cubic feet, I'm sorry, it's cubic feet because it's volume, that last few cubic feet can have a very low rate, because as such it would go empty if it is not filled. Skimming strategy is one where the price is set quite high, so that because the competition is low initially, so in the skimming strategy, the companies try to extract as much profit from the market as possible. They also try to get all the promotional cost from the market. Whatever promotional cost they incur, they try to get that back from the market. Penetration pricing. After the skimming strategy, there is a penetration pricing, where companies try to lower the price so that they can penetrate, so they can increase the volume. Sales based pricing, lower price to attract mass market and higher sales. Probably we discussed that. Social responsibility pricing. Uh, if there is a social responsibility involved, then the carrier can provide service at a much lower rate. So there is a natural calamity, say an earthquake and famine. So in those cases, keeping in mind the social responsibility, it's also a goodwill for the company. They can provide service at a very low cost or no cost at all, maybe at some times. Estimating demand, estimating cost. Many a times it's difficult to estimate what's the new demand for new services. Uh, price estimates used to predict impact. Price estimate is, or price elasticity is, how much the demand changes based on a change in price. So that can be used as a tool. Companies might increase the price a little bit to see or to study how much the actually demand changes, and based on that they can decide like how elastic the um, demand is, so that can they increase the price even further, or they have to lower back the price to the initial value. Role of surveys and market tests. Sometimes they might make a questionnaire for the consumers to see what, how do they rate the price and the service. If their pricing doesn't have any importance on the customer, like it's irrelevant, they are ready to pay any price. Maybe the business customers, they are not they are not I it's not probably they're less influenced by the pricing strategy than leisure customers. So these tests, this market test, this surveys can be done to see which type of consumer is more sensitive to price, and then the pricing can be done accordingly. Estimating cost, determination of what costs to include, cost variation and different levels of output. Now we have seen that there can be different ways or different phases in which the service can be provided. One can be the front haul, one can be the back haul. Now in the back haul, what are the cost components which can be included? Does the fixed cost gets are to be included in the back haul? Sometimes they are, sometimes not, depending again on the demand. We have actually talked about this in a previous slide, where we have shown that even if the fixed cost is not included in the back haul, still it is a profitable to provide that service, because as such the carrier has to come back. Cost variables at different levels of output. Now if there is a huge volume of output, then the cost of service for unit volume may be low, because the fixed cost is distributed among that high service level or the high volume of output. Sometimes if the service is low, if the service volume is low, then the fixed cost is distributed among that small volume, so the cost increases, the total cost increases. Next slide. Given demand and cost estimate, actual price can be set. So based on the demand and the cost, the price can be set. The pricing can be done again demand based, cost based, profit based and competition based. In the demand based, first the demand in the market is judged, then the price is set. In the cost based, it is done basically on what's the cost the carrier is incurring. On the profit based, it is the sole motive is to increase the profit, so the pricing would be done accordingly. In the competition based, it is based on the number of competitors in the market, how they're setting their price, whether there's a market leader. So based on those factors, the competition pricing is set. Discount and allowances are oftentimes available in the transportation market. Sometimes it's lower cost, lower price or high discount for a large shipment. It can be some low price for low demand seasons, like maybe in the winter, if you want to get some work done, maybe some landscaping, you can get done at a lower cost, because in the winter the demand for those services are low. Similarly, for the transportation, if in certain months the demand is low, so if, suppose in the summer the demand for a particular transportation service is low, at that time the price discounts can be given. Uh, Cash discount, if the shipper gives pays in cash and they pays within a stipulated time, then there can be some discount which is given. Now there are some federal regulations which can basically guide how much discount you can give. The discount should be given, or that amount of discount should be given, which is equivalent to the additional gain which the carrier makes by providing that service. As I said, that if your carrier is providing service in off season, and by providing the service in the off season, he's making some extra, he's gaining, he's utilizing that service which was laying idle, and he's making some gain out of that, so he can give the discount. So whatever gain he makes, he passes on part of the discount to the shippers. Now if he passes on a discount which is much higher than the gain he himself makes, so that would be basically to kill competition, and that's not allowed. So another carrier can basically sue a carrier if he gives a huge discount, and which is targeted solely to kill competition. It will go against the antitrust law. uh, so as we said, that it is a deregulated market, but there are some rules and regulations which which guide or which bind the pricing structure. And again, the court of law is the final body who can give their judgment on these, if there is some dispute in setting some price. Most common mistakes in pricing: over reliance on cost based pricing. If a carrier must just depend on the his own cost, and he wants to put all the cost components in every pricing, then he might lose the market because that might be too high. Oftentimes he might have to take out the fixed cost from the pricing component. Slow reaction to the changes in the market condition. Because the market is dynamic, the carrier has to make his pricing dynamic, so he has to change it based on the market. Ignoring market mix. Now for product marketing, we have seen there are 4 P's of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. Similarly for service, there are 4 P's. For product, over here it's the service, there is the price, there is a promotion, and there is a place. Place is the way the service is provided to the consumers or the shippers. So all those have to be taken care of the same way a product is manufactured and sold to consumers. Prices not tailored to services and markets. That's again another problem. It should be targeted, it should be changed, modified based on the market. Failure to price consistently with strategic plan. So a company might have a strategic vision, a strategic plan, and the pricing should be according to that plan. Otherwise those two won't match, and finally the company will fail if there is a mismatch between those two in the long run. So our chapter on costing and pricing of transportation ends here. um, Again, you have to devote a lot of time to go through this chapter, um, and remember a lot of stuff which might come in your exam. Again, I'd like to remind you, like for the quiz, mm, you might go through part of the chapters and answer the quiz and stuff, so that way you may not have to remember the whole thing at one go. But quizzes are meant for preparing you for the exam, so please try to keep that in mind, and read the chapter thoroughly and try to understand every component of the chapter, not as piecemeal but as a whole, so that in the exam, during or before the exam, you are prepared with this chapter. Now again, if you have any problem, please feel free to get in touch with me either by email or by phone. I understand sometimes I might get delayed to answer some of your emails. I tried to catch up with that. Again, I should apologize if there had been some um, a delay in responding. Uh, Please keep me updated if you require any help. Give your quiz in the right time. Don't wait till the last moment. Don't wait till the evening of Sunday. So you have the Saturdays and Sundays open. Try to do it as soon as possible. Again, you have those two attempts, and it is the average of those two. I think by now you have known most of the structures of this course, how it is laid out. So I'll stop here. Thank you, and keep me updated about any help you require from my end. Thank you. Bye.